Alright everybody, I hate when YouTube videos have long intros, so I'm just going to jump into it here and start drawing so that I don't sit here and talk too long. And I'll explain a little bit as I get into this about what I'm drawing. Today is Puddleglum from The Silver Chair, from Chronicles of Narnia, The Silver Chair. And I am a big fan of Puddleglum. I actually think he's one of the best characters from the Chronicles of Narnia. To me, he's the most memorable, and he's one of the few who has kind of like a legitimate comedic element to him. For as much as everybody kind of likes, I say everybody, I assume everybody likes Chronicles of Narnia, it's a nice fun story, etc. There's not a ton of humor to it. In fact, I would say it's probably something that's lacking a little bit. So if you're not familiar with Puddleglum, for one thing, go read The Silver Chair. But he's described in some detail at the beginning of the book. He's a marsh wiggle, and so he's a little bit of a frog person, but not quite so simple. He's described as being really sort of long and lanky, and he wears a wide-brimmed hat that's pointed at the top. He has webbed finger and toes, and he's generally dour about things. He has kind of a pessimistic attitude about life. I'm sure, like all pessimists that I've met, he would refer to himself as a realist, because that's what pessimists do. But he's more of an amusing one. The ones in real life rarely are. So I'm going to try and get something that works for Puddleglum. Something that makes him look solemn and unhappy and pessimistic, and then also hits all the points. In the book, he's described as being all arms and legs, so he's supposed to have way more arm and leg than he does torso, and I'm going to give him kind of a bulbous head in terms of fitting that sort of frog-like bearing. I'm actually really bad at drawing pointed hats. I just had to fix that, and one reason why is because I have always been rather poor at that. I don't draw any sort of cowboys, wizards, anything that would require dealing with wide-brimmed hats, so I always struggle with figuring them out. It usually takes a few movements to get them there. I'm going to see if I can get him with kind of like a handout filling for the rain, and maybe with the other hand he's got a fishing pole over his shoulder. In the very beginning, he's described as going fishing. He goes fishing for eels. And he also looks up at the sky at one point and murmurs that it's going to rain. Another challenge to his character design is he is actually supposed to have long hair, or longish hair, but it's less like a typical hair, and it's more like flat reed grass, and so I'm going to try and figure out how to get that going. For some reason, the sun, it was nice and cloudy, and then I sat down to record this, and the sun blasted through the window and slapped me directly in the face. So I hope you're enjoying that, this eyeball that I have that's lit up like the sun. Alright, I struggle with this kind of anatomy stuff. This is another thing, just like the hat. If I'm not often drawing unusual proportions, then I'm probably going to struggle with getting that right. So I need to elongate his body and make his arms nice and thin and his hands nice and big so that you get the goofy proportions from it. And I need to make sure to do that during this early structural stage, or I am going to forget about it very, very quickly. I'm just going to do waist up on this figure as well, just like with Snape when I did him last time. I just find it a little bit easier to focus on face detail and stuff if I'm worrying about that. I don't really like full figure character drawings when you're trying to go in for the basic design and personality. You definitely need them at some point, but not necessarily at the beginning. Let me look at this for a minute. I really want to kind of blacken his eye like a fish. For some, I couldn't think of the word fish. I want to blacken his eye like a fish, but I also want him to be kind of looking up a little bit. That sound is really starting to kill me. Go behind the trees. It's like an inch above the tree line, but making him look up with that eye blacked in is difficult. So we'll see how that goes as I move further into this. I think that's okay for a rough. Let me go from the rough, and we'll start some red pencils and start making some corrections, figure out where lines actually go. I also like the idea that drawing on the wrong layer, that his nose is kind of a continuation of his brow. So the brow comes out and the nose just kind of extends directly from that and comes down. I feel like I'm stealing this from the Zoras from like Ocarina of Time, which is easily my favorite Zelda game. They've changed the way Zoras look since then, but that one was a big influence on me when I was young, especially the art books that went along with it, which at that time wasn't really an art book, it was just like the game booklet that was memorable, to say the least. We'll give him a bit of a chin here. I don't want it to just be totally rounded out down there. And I want his mouth to be one of those kind of firm set flat lines where you bunch up around here just underneath the edge of the mouth, because that's what you get with a good scowl. So you'll have a little bulge right there. That's not bad. I'm not drawing terribly today. I mean, I could go back on that, but for today I've been drawing okay. I've done quite a bit of it today, working on the cover for Theseus, actually. Theseus Volume 2, which is going to be kickstarting here in a couple of months, sometime in October is it so far. That's the plan so far. I've got to figure out how to talk cogently while drawing. I've yet to figure that out. So I'm going to interpret this flat reed grass thing sort of like a thick, large leaf of grass, something that's quite wide, like a ½ inch wide or an inch wide or something. And then I'll just go in here and create a dark area shadow for the inks. His clothing is not really described at all, so I'm going to assume that I can kind of get away with whatever. I'm going to have a couple of these reed ones sort of hang in front of his shoulder, and the rest of them go back over his shoulder. I'll worry about costuming once I feel like the anatomy is correct, especially with these unusual proportions. Get that collarbone in there. He's also described as having kind of muddy skin. I don't know how to interpret that, but it makes me think of like those little fish, I think they're called mud skippers, or maybe a salamander is a good one as well, where the skin is almost translucent and there's all this texture in it. I like the idea of that for Puddleglum. Let's give him some very long and thin arms. Even if I'm doing long and thin, I feel like I still want the basic musculature in my mind, even if it's not visible. Even if you can't see it really clearly, I want to know, okay, center line, for example, the pectoral line, that's going to run all the way down the torso to the groin. And so that's going to be that seam that would run between the abdominal muscles. Even if I'm not drawing a character who's muscular and you're going to see these things, I still want to know where they are. Without them, it would be too easy to get lost. Let's give him a set of fingers here. Hands take me long enough to figure out. I know at this point, just throw something in there that's in roughly the right place and then come back and figure it out as you go. As long as I've got the basic things in here, like, for example, length of the hand, you know, because here's the top of the hand, here's the bottom of the wrist. There's a length there, and a rookie mistake that I made for a long time, and I definitely see students make frequently, is kind of forgetting about that or making it too short and just going straight to fingers. You end up with a really misshapen hand. Half the length of a hand is the hand itself, and then the fingers. So the palm, I should say, since the hand is both palm and fingers. And see, this is me realizing that I've been inconsistent already. I like where the face is going. I like that. This arm over here is not as long as the other, and it's not as thin as the other. So that's inconsistent. So I'll deal with that in a bit, but I see it now. I recognize that it's a problem now, and I'll deal with it later. Elongated torso. Try to figure this hand shape out here. I'm going to just draw out the palm, because if I'm reaching out for rain, I feel like I would actually extend my hand out further than I have him doing. Sort of pushed out, but I'm also a little bit confined by the space of the drawing. Let me try moving it a little bit. Just kind of shifting things over some. And if I give myself a little more room, and I just take that palm and I move it out, that might be better. It would also come down a little bit. Yeah. I thought that felt odd. I think that's an improvement. We'll see. That's definitely as far as I can go. Like that, I've already got fingers that are out of the way. Now, this is one of these embarrassing things that I've been drawing for so long. I should be able to do this without having to look at my hands. But if my right hand is held out, the thumb is turned outward. So, putting thumb on the wrong side of the hand is such a classic mistake. Not sure how big to make his thumb. I'll kind of leave that for the time being. I'm just going to give him some very typical kind of rubbery legs here. It's not bad. I like his gigantic honking nose. That amuses me for some reason. I like characters with big noses. I had a teacher when I took character design. Did I even? I may have even told this story last time I did this video, but for the final project, I did like an Old West cast. And I don't think that teacher liked me very much. And for good reason. I don't think I did very well in the course. I feel like everything I learned about character design, I figured out afterwards based upon all the criticism I got during the class. But anyway, the criticism was that my side characters were a lot more interesting than my main characters. And I have come to realize that this is just the case when you're dealing with a story. it's a lot easier to make side characters interesting. With a main character, you feel like this need to have them be approachable by everyone, and so you tend to not put as much individual personality in them. And they're a little bit more tabula rasa, something for the reader or for the viewer or whatever to attach themselves to, because they're somewhat generic. They're a little bit of a lens through which you can see things that are happening, serving the function of the observer in your place. That's pretty boring. It made me realize that even when I do main characters, I wanted to find a way to make them as interesting as side characters, and hopefully I do that in my own work. But I think Puddleglum is a great example of a side character who just gets to be really strange by virtue of being a side character. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and try to pencil and put in some actual clothing for my poor naked Puddleglum. Okay, I was hitting the wrong button, I was wondering. Alright. I want to make sure to leave the sight of the brow right there. For some reason, I'm choking on something I can feel and I can hear, but I can't get rid of. I've got his brow visible there, which helps make him a little bit... Alright, I'm just going to edit out some coughing. Alright, let's hope that that helped at least somewhat, but I feel my voice still kind of fighting against me here. I got a little bit of the brow visible, which I think helps a lot in seeing that this is a three-dimensional face. Should I put like a little bag under the eye or something? I don't want to age him up too much, which is very easily something that can happen. It doesn't seem too bad. I haven't picked a light direction yet, but I'm going to go ahead and assume shadow right here. And on the back of the nostril, and then underside of the nose. We're just going to shadow those. Leave that little bulge. One of my favorite things in comics for some reason, I just love this. It's when the mouth is closed tightly enough that you can see separation between the lips in some places, but not in others. It's like a broken line that goes across. And so, you know, on this side, I'll be able to see pretty much all of these, but at some places, it's like the corners of the lips turn down just enough. I actually see Batman done this way a lot, which I rather like. Alright, I might end up making him look bad if I put like a wrinkle there. I don't like that. Don't care for that. I like it more if it's sort of clean face. Maybe if I gave him... It does say in the book that he has a bit of a sunken face. So I'll create that little separation right there. That felt pretty good. That doesn't feel weird. Alright. Face. Hair. I think the sun finally went behind that tree and gave me peace. So, I appreciate that. And I think my voice is clearing up, which is great. Alright, we're definitely going to have shadow there. Going to have shadow here. I'm just going to exit. Just mark it with an X. Oh, that's right, clothing. You gotta wear something, Puddleglum. You can't just be naked. Well, I mean, there's obviously a... you know, I've got a lot of family from South Georgia and spent many summers and or holidays down there when I was growing up. And whenever I think about Puddleglum, I always think about the marsh mud and the thick, deep mud in the canals in South Georgia right there on the coast. I always think about him. So I feel like I think about that. I feel like I want to attach him to that at least somewhat. And so I'm going to give him a little bit of a southern coastal vibe, inevitably. Either through the clothing or just through the way that I'm treating him here. It's just what it makes me think of. I don't really like the way that looks. That makes the hat look too deep, I think. Doesn't quite look right. Not a smart one on my part. Let's try just putting this in. And maybe it's not perfectly round. Maybe it's got a little bit of a point on either end, like a slightly diamond or ellipse or something like that. So put that on. And he would, of course, be shadowed here, sort of underneath the brim. And that means also that it would probably cast a shadow on his face. And I'm not sure if I can get away with doing this and, have this multiple levels of light and dark, but we'll try, including a little shadow there underneath as though the hat is casting a shadow. And I like the idea too that his his hat is homemade, and so it looks a little bit like a seashell or something. It's made by like wrapping something around, and so it has these different layers. That's not mentioned in the book. That's just kind of an affectation that I like the idea of. I'm not going to put him straight up in a flannel shirt. It seems like he would, I think, wear baggy clothing. Anybody who lives in a hot, humid environment tends to prefer baggier clothing. And he does live in a swamp or a bog or something like that. So we're gonna give him like a baggy Henley. We'll do that. It's got kind of like these tattered sleeves around its edges. Maybe I don't want it floating out. Maybe it should come down a little bit and then something like that. And I'll try and respect gravity. I have to think a lot about cloth when I'm drawing it. Not something I've ever been kind of naturally gifted with. There are some things that I am. That's just not really one of them. So give him some nice baggy sleeves here. I feel like with Puddleglum, I still want to be able to see some of the musculature. Because I think of him as just really, really thin. Just no real fat on him. So even though he's very thin, he's still going to have like visible creases in the muscle lines. He's just not muscular per se. So if I actually did this, there would be a little bunch right here. And then there would be the shirt itself. The only thing I won't really bag out is the top area of the pants around the thighs. I'll leave that thinner to kind of exaggerate the width of the shirt. I'll try to get some more logical creases and things in here as well. Make that shirt look more loose, more baggy, more worn as I'm able to. And then he's just going to have like a cane pole. and very thin hands. I'll remove some of like the bulk from them and make them kind of bony. In his fist here, you're not really going to be able to see any webbing, so I'll need to accentuate that on the other hand. His head is probably a little too big as I'm looking at it. I'll keep going with it and see where it goes, but his head looks a little too big. I think it makes him seem shorter. This is something I find that I'm frequently doing right now, because when I'm drawing Theseus, his proportions are a bit more like a teenager, like a young teenager. And so I give him a slightly larger head. Let me just shrink it down a little bit and lengthen his neck. I think that's going to work better in the end. In general, I should probably make him even longer and lankier, but we'll deal with what we have so far. I'll fix those other bits when I get into the inking. Alright, let's give him a thumb here. And I'll draw the hand out without the webbing first. I'll just give long fingers, like abnormally long fingers, and then go between them and add the webbing. I'm also just going to give him 4 fingers total. Oh, I can't do that though. I've got 5 on this one. I had an idea while drawing this hand, and then I realized, oh, that actually won't work at all because I'm super dumb. Okay. So let's put the pinky in there because I don't feel like disrupting that hand, which looks okay right now, and we'll just web that one up. I probably should have set that camera up properly when I actually did it. And by camera, I mean iPad on a stick, which is what that is. I'm supposed to be using my iPad to draw and Procreate. I just can't get used to it. For all my students who do it just fine with no issues, I'm impressed by you. I just can't get used to it. Okay, that's probably enough for the time being, and I'll go ahead and jump into inking. I can already sense that this isn't 100% what I want from Puddleglum, but it's all right. It's a decent starting place. And honestly, sometimes I'm able to make things better in inking, so we'll see how it goes. I'll add a little furrow right here. Add some concern. I completely forgot about inverting that eye, so now that I have actually have this ready, I'm going to turn the eye black and see how it feels. I'll leave it there for now. It's kind of interesting. All right. I want to be subtle with these, but I am going to put some lines underneath. And then that mouth, as I described it, I have found that the worst part of doing these videos, which I've really only done one other at this point, the snake one, but it's watching them back to edit them. I mean, I'm hoping they're not terrible to watch for people, and that there's some entertainment value to it. But it's not the most palatable thing in the world to watch yourself. It's a very different thing. So, maybe you can resonate with that. Trying to figure out how to do this hair without committing too much time to the hair. So my back is breaking. Old age. There we go. Let's grab a couple of these places. It helps me to fill them in as I go. Ah! Just filling them in as black is probably the better idea. It helps me keep an eye on kind of what's going on in the drawing, how the design is looking, because I really think of the choice of what to turn black and what to turn white as part of the drawing's design more than anything else. It's kind of a compositional choice more than it's just a choice of lighting. Because I can take some areas like the bridge of the nose here and say, okay, I'll handle the value there a different way, but underneath the jaw, that's dark enough that it'll actually be blacked out. That's a design choice. It is not a logical choice per se of just this is in this area and so it would be shadowed. It's never that simple. I have wished at times it was that simple, but you can make a drawing look pretty bad by being too literally consistent when you're talking about ink. Something is not better just because it's logical in terms of the direction of light. Not that simple. Let's do better with this cane pole. That's better. I'm just going to put some texture lines in here. A little bit of shadow just by building them up. That's alright. That reminds me of a cane pole. And then I'll use that collar to kind of cut off the hair a little bit there. There's a separation point. Figure out where the seams fall. And I'm probably going to go ahead and black the entire area underneath the brim of the hat. Again, design-wise, I think that works okay. It's going to pull the eye upwards because there's going to be heavy areas of black up there, and probably just not as much anywhere else. Alright, we'll do some scratches and things using these kind of short terminal lines. Just give it a texture that's a little different from the other things I have done thus far. And then I get distracted and put some in the hair. Put a little shadow in there too. Maybe up close to the hat brim I should have a little bit more as those shadows being cast. I just don't want to make it look like he has dark hair. I want to make it to look like these are shadows. They're not necessarily referring to dark hair. I think that does okay. Alright, and then I'm going to put a little shadow in here. Some blocks kind of inside. Try not to take it too far. I want to allude to the idea that there's still a brim right there that you can see via the negative space. Alright, alright. Maybe darken up a little bit there. I'm not sure if I should break out the hatching on some of those shadowed areas. Never sure about hatching. We'll do some other stuff, come back to it. Oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be making his skin look muddy as well. Muddy complexion is what it says. And I take that to mean mottled and blotchy. Obviously open to interpretation, but that's always what I've thought of. People always love to argue over whether or not a representation, typically in a movie, nobody's definitely following me around concerning over how I've drawn characters. But on movies especially, to argue over whether or not something is canon, and to be completely honest, there's a lot of room for interpretation. One of my least favorite visualizations, and it's a character I actually intend to do in one of these sessions, is from the Hobbit films, Bjorn. Probably one of the best characters in Middle-earth. Just a small little side thing, but just a fantastic character. That's the most, I think, disappointed I've ever been and waiting to see somebody show up in a film, especially because I think I was misled, and it's partly to Peter Jackson's credit. The Lord of the Rings movies and such, very happy with the vast majority of characters, very happy. Not Bjorn. Didn't like the whole rock star look for him. The gigantic hair, the generally not frightening bearing. So anyway, people can get upset about that, but even with that one, you could construe most of what you see in the film from the descriptions. It's just an interpretation. It's not as though it's a radical departure per se. There's definitely elements you could quibble over, but the reality is these things are pretty subjective, and even when a character is described, it doesn't mean that you have clarity per se. So my version of Puddleglum is what it is, but it's not by any means the only possibility you could come up with. I'll try something here. I'm going to try and just black some of this out, and then have it just sort of come up a little bit from dark, and then of course underneath leave a shadow. That's a pretty grand trick most of the time. I don't know that I did it 100% well. You know, maybe I could still use like some wrinkles and things here in the pantaloons. That little sort of star-shaped wrinkles that you get right there around the groin, and most pants. There would probably also be one right there. You're usually going to get one of these along the side too. Yeah, that helped. I did a lot. And then just sort of bringing it up from dark from the bottom. Really common comic book trick. Just kind of pushes the eye upward, which I know is kind of the opposite. I said up here all the black was going to draw attention to itself, and then down here at the bottom it's going to kind of push attention away from itself. But it does work. It does work. You're pushing attention towards the center and towards the head, which is already going to naturally kind of gravitate that way. But you can help it. You can contribute. Great artists, great illustrators especially, they tend to just do this, and they do it subtly and you don't really notice unless you go looking for it. But man, does it make a difference. You know, I think it's a little bit like a ship. Yeah, the human mind is going to do some things very naturally when it looks at an image. But it's kind of like the wind blowing on a ship. The wind's blowing, but if you throw out a sail, what's happening naturally then works to your advantage. So when you're drawing, sort of pushing attention around, even though we're going to naturally kind of gravitate towards the face, basically throwing out the sails, helping things along, it makes a big difference. And if I go and I study some of the best artists that I know, like Hal Foster, I'm such a big fan of, Frank Frazetta, Jack Kirby as well, pushing the eye around using the ink, dark and light areas, positive and negative space. Just experts at it, and they do it so subtly that you can't even tell that they're doing it unless you go looking, but the effect is real. Okay, there's his little webbed hand. I did not draw that hand well at all. I didn't spend hardly any time on those fingers. So that's probably the weakest part of this, and I don't think I'm going to take the time to fix it in purpose of this video. I will say that if I was drawing this for publication, I would go in and do some more work on that hand and those fingers, but right now I'm just going to get through it so I can get on to the next stage of the process. Let's drop out the pencils and kind of look at that. See, I think I put a little too much weight here under the arm as well. It's drawing too much attention there. And so what I would do is thin it out a little bit. And I think also I do need a little more in the way of texture. Like maybe I'll get that little wrist bump there, and maybe I'll kind of gently outline some of these muscles and just add some general texture to him. you know, treat it. I don't want him to look like he's covered in warts or something, but something that gives off a little bit of sense of that mottled skin underneath. And let's see, I could do some rain as well. What is the old method for doing rain? I'm trying to remember. There's a way to do it in clip that is really easy, and I can't think of what it is. So I'm going to do the cheater version that isn't quite right because it doesn't do parallel lines. And so I'm going to take a perspective grid here, if I can click it. There we go. And I'm just going to pull the grid way, 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 way down. And try to get it straight-ish. The further away, the more parallel lines you get, but it's not going to be perfect either way. And then I'm going to take just the ink, and I'm just going to throw some raindrops on here that are going to be perfectly in line because they're using the perspective grid as reference. I realized I should not start at the top and draw down. I should, start at the bottom and push up, because that's gonna give me something that looks more like a drop. It's coming in at a little bit of an angle, and you can see it's just not perfectly parallel. That's the problem I was talking about. It would be better if it was. I just think that would look more naturally like rain. But this does okay. We'll get some sprinkles in there, and then I'll hide that ruler. Let's see, can I turn off the... There we go. Alright, I'm going to take the paintbrush and try to put in a little gray. I'll start with shadowing in some of these areas that would clearly be shadowed, and I'll worry about that shadow under the brim after that, because basically I can build up on these and make them double up, and so there'll be shadows under shadows, and that will look more natural. Now some of that on the hair, and on this side. There would be a shadow underneath the nose, and definitely these that are kind of under the lips here. And then in that sunken jaw. Well, he definitely looks pessimistic. I'll give him that. I could clean up those lines right there, but they're okay for the time being. This is where it can really help me some with this cloth too, just by helping me suggest the form of these wrinkles. And then for the hand, since that's kind of away from the light source, we're just going to put on kind of like a heavy shadow. Which, thanks to this handy dandy little watercolor brush end clip, is handled just by pressure. Just increase, decrease the pressure. Which is nice, I like that a lot. Alright, I'd love to just cover up as much of this hand and arm as possible. I don't think any of this part looks good. It is something I would probably erase and just redraw entirely. I do not like, if I don't like anything, I just want to redo it. Just redo the entire thing. So, and that's not a bad habit either. That's a habit I have learned. I like it. I like being a little perfectionist about these things. Does it slow me down sometimes? Yes. Can I do it in this video? No. I'm not going to pretend though that I don't consistently put out comic pages that have pretty significant flaws to them. I absolutely do. But for as much time as I am able to muster, I fix whatever's fixable. Okay, now put that on there, and I kind of want to put that little gleam back in his eye. Yeah, see, I made this whole thing just looks horrible. The lines are way too thick. I did a much better job kind of measuring out my lines on the face, but I wasn't consistent. And so if I go down here, these are, you know, big, chunky, meaty lines. This arm is a little bit better, but it's still not great. So really the place where I handled this best was on the head and the hat. Other places I would definitely redraw that, slim down those lines. I've heard it said before, and it is just simply true. Thinner lines look more professional, and if you're not paying attention, like I wasn't when I did this, you can increase the weight of your lines so much that it, without really thinking about it, it causes parts of the drawing to feel separate from each other, and you get something like the arms are here. I'm actually still okay with the pants. I think those work alright, because those look like larger brush strokes, and I got all these little thin ones doing the build up. I think that's fine. But this arm right here is utter garbage. I should just take it off and stick it behind his back to fix that. Honestly, it probably would be fixed if I just did another pass over it. Okay. I think that's probably as far as I'm going to take Puddleglum here. I'll write his name on it. Puddleglum. This is one of these things I absolutely hate about digital in general. That taper is horrible. This is a dreadful taper. What I would have to use is just find a different brush. It's fine if you keep the brush size small, but if you increase it, that's where you get problems. And then my name. So you can't steal my artwork here. I know you're clamoring for it. You can't have it. Now it's impenetrable, untouchable. But that's it for this one. I think for the next one I'm going to do Bjorn, and maybe I'll do some sketches beforehand and try and come up with a design, because I don't want to do a rogue terrible arm for him. And also I might have to think through him a little bit. It's been a while. I've thought through Puddleglum before, in very least with the face and the hat and such, the parts I did best. That's something I've in the very least thought about and sketched out.